A cloud of suspicion surrounds the deaths of Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife, whose bodies were found in their Santa Fe home.
There is a tunnel beneath Gene Hackman's mansion. It descends 312 feet into the earth. The FBI found it. And what was waiting at the bottom has not been fully reported anywhere. When federal investigators arrived at Hackman's Santa Fe estate on February 26, 2025, they came for a routine death call. 2 elderly people, natural causes, paperwork. But inside the private library, hidden behind mahogany paneling that looked identical to every other wall in the room, they found a concealed passage. Stone steps descending into darkness. Cold air rising from somewhere far below. And the deeper they went, the less routine any of this became. 47 crates. A ledger written in German, dated 1947. Photographs with faces deliberately cut out. Symbols carved across the chamber walls that match no known language on Earth. And at the far end, an 8-foot iron door, sealed, with measurable airflow coming from the other side. The FBI still hasn't opened it. Here is everything they found. The fortress. The FBI wasn't supposed to find a tunnel. They arrived on February 26, 2025, to process what appeared to be a straightforward tragedy. Front door open, scattered pill bottles on the bathroom countertop, 1 dog dead in a closet, 2 more alive on the property. Betsy Arakawa had died weeks earlier, around February 3rd. Her body undiscovered until investigators found both of them together that morning. Gene's cause of death was listed as cardiovascular disease complicated by Alzheimer's. Routine, tragic, closed. Except the estate Gene Hackman had built in the New Mexico desert was not the home of a man who expected to be found. Richard Castagnano has spent 20 years consulting on security architecture for celebrities, diplomats, and Fortune 500 executives. When he reviewed the Hackman property systems for a 2019 insurance assessment, he stopped his team and told them to verify the paperwork twice. "I've worked on embassy security," he said. "I've consulted for defense contractors. This estate had infrastructure that would make some of them uncomfortable. 12-foot stone walls enclosing the entire perimeter. Reinforced steel gates. Motion sensors, and thermal cameras positioned across 23 acres of dense forest. The kind of surveillance grid associated with government installations, not retired actors. Staff were hand-picked, vetted, and bound by ironclad ND as covering not just what they said, but what they were permitted to remember. But that level of security wasn't what raised red flags. What raised red flags was what the contractors remembered. Miguel Reyes has done foundation work in Santa Fe for 30 years. When investigators reached him, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. The silence of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time. "They wanted concrete walls 18 inches thick in certain sections of the basement," he said. "That's bunker-level construction. I asked what it was for. They said storage." A pause. "But you don't build storage like you're expecting a bomb." Reyes was paid triple his standard rate. He signed an NDA prohibiting him from discussing the work for 20 years. That NDA expired in 2024, 1 year before Hackman's death. When investigators asked him to describe the full scope of what he'd built, he couldn't. He had only worked on one section. Specialists were brought in for the deeper levels. Levels that Reyes was told flatly had no official existence. The FBI was now standing directly above them. The discovery. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo had spent 22 years photographing the worst outcomes of human violence. She walked into Hackman's mansion on February 26th, expecting sadness. An elderly couple. Natural causes. Close the file. She was not prepared for what she found almost immediately. Furniture had been moved recently, displacement visible only in carpet impressions left by pieces that had stood in the same position for years. Scuff marks on the hardwood floors didn't match the mobility patterns of two elderly people in their final weeks. Personal documents in Hackman's study had been rifled through and hastily reorganized. Not ransacked, searched. Someone had been looking for something specific, or Hackman himself, in his final days, had been hiding it. The scene didn't match two elderly people dying quietly, not even close. Then Okonkwo found the library. She ran her palm along the mahogany paneling, standard procedure in high-value estates. Her hand stopped. A section approximately 4 feet wide resonated differently when she tapped it, hollow. Behind the panel, concealed with precision that would have been invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look, was a narrow passageway. Stone steps worn smooth by decades of use, spiraling downward into absolute darkness. The air rising from below was cold and damp. One agent described the smell as something like opening a sealed space that hadn't been disturbed in generations. But what stopped everyone cold wasn't the age of the passage. Certain sections had been reinforced with modern concrete. Fresh electrical conduits ran along the walls. Someone had been maintaining this passage, recently and deliberately. Okonkwo stood at the top of those stairs for a full minute before descending. "I've been in situations where my instincts told me to leave," she said later. "This was different. The danger wasn't obvious, but something in me registered it anyway." She went down, into the darkness. The descent took nearly 15 minutes. 312 feet below the library floor, the staircase opened into a chamber measuring approximately 40 feet by 60 feet, with ceilings arched in a style local historian Dr. Elena Vasquez identified as consistent with Spanish colonial construction from the late 19th century. Vasquez was not sleeping well when she described what her property records had revealed. The land changed hands 7 times between 1920 and 1965. Each transaction was deliberately structured to obscure the buyer's identity. Shell companies, anonymous trusts, documentation worded with the specific vagueness of people who understood exactly what they were concealing. That's not normal real estate activity. That's the kind of paper trail you create when you're hiding something or someone. Between 1945 and 1950, 3 separate property surveys were commissioned. All 3 surveyors submitted incomplete reports. 2 left New Mexico within months of beginning their work. The third died in a car accident 6 weeks after his final visit to the property. The FBI was now standing inside the chamber those surveyors never finished documenting. 47 wooden crates stacked against every wall, some intact. Others crumbled with age, contents spilling across the stone floor. Dust covered everything, the kind that accumulates over decades. But in certain locations near the crates, the dust had been disturbed. Recently, someone had been inside this chamber before the FBI arrived. Inside one crate, a leather-bound ledger dated 1947, every page filled with names, dates, and financial figures, all written in German. The year 1947 carries specific historical weight. It was the active period of Operation Paperclip, the classified U.S. government program that recruited approximately 1,600 German scientists and engineers from the former Nazi regime into American research programs, often using falsified documentation. A German-language ledger from 1947, found in a sealed underground chamber in New Mexico, sits in a very specific historical context. Another crate held 63 photographs, men in military uniforms matching no recognized armed force. Meetings in dimly lit rooms. Locations researchers couldn't identify. Several showed individuals whose names had been physically scratched from the historical record, not accidentally faded, removed. One photograph stopped every agent in the room. It showed a group of men standing in front of what appeared to be the entrance to this exact tunnel, taken in the 1940s based on clothing and image quality. Two faces had been carefully cut from the photograph with something sharp and precise. Someone had made a deliberate decision that these two men would never be identified. The photographs weren't the worst thing the FBI found in that chamber. Not even close. The symbols. When Okonkwo's flashlight swept across the far wall, she dropped her camera. The walls were covered in markings, hundreds of them, not scratched, carved with precision and deliberate intent. They didn't match any known language or writing system on Earth. She photographed over 300 individual symbols. Her hands were shaking. In 22 years, she had never had that reaction to evidence. "I couldn't look at them for more than 30 seconds at a time," she said. "I've seen things that would break most people. But those symbols made me feel like I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to see." Nobody spoke for a while after that. Analysis identified several distinct categories. Some resembled medieval European alchemical notation, symbolic systems used to encode knowledge in ways incomprehensible to uninitiated readers. Others resembled technical schematics, engineering diagrams for mechanisms inconsistent with 19th century capability. And then there were the astronomical charts. Dr. Marcus Webb, an astrophysicist who examined the photographic documentation over 3 weeks, chose his words carefully. If these configurations represent actual stellar positions, they would correspond to a date approximately 12,000 years in the past. He paused. Or, and this is where it becomes genuinely unsettling, 12,000 years in the future. The mathematical precision is remarkable. Whoever produced these understood orbital mechanics at a level extraordinary for any period prior to the 20th century. 3 theories have emerged: an eccentric previous owner, a wealthy amateur occultist with money and obsessive interests, coded messages readable only by someone already in possession of the interpretive key, or the one that keeps researchers awake at 3 in the morning. These symbols represent knowledge never intended to be found, passed through generations of custodians who understood something the rest of humanity was deliberately never told. But here's what nobody has said publicly. The symbols weren't distributed randomly. The arrangement had directionality. Markings clustered densely around the eastern wall, the same wall that faced the iron door. Researchers described the pattern as resembling not decoration, but instructions, or a warning, pointing towards something the FBI had not yet reached. The door that shouldn't exist. At the far end of the vault, partially concealed behind deteriorating crates, federal agents found something that stopped the room. An iron door, 8 feet tall, 4 inches thick, layered in rust, and decades of sealed existence. No handle, only a heavy corroded locking mechanism engineered not for regular use, but as a permanent seal. Not meant to be opened, meant to stay shut. One FBI agent, speaking anonymously, described the moment they pushed aside those crates and it came into full view. "We'd seen the crates, we'd seen the symbols." A pause. "But when we saw that door, everyone went quiet. It wasn't just old, it felt old, like something that had been waiting down there before any of us were born." He hesitated. There was this feeling that it didn't want to be opened. The door is still sealed today. No official explanation has been given for why authorities haven't attempted to open it. The FBI has declined to comment beyond carefully worded statements that acknowledge an ongoing investigation without specifying what is being investigated. Language constructed by people very aware of what they are choosing not to say. Geological surveys conducted years before Hackman acquired the property identified subsurface anomalies beneath the estate, hollow pockets extending hundreds of feet in multiple directions. This tunnel may not be a single passage, it may be a network. And then there is the thermal imaging result. There is active airflow on the other side of that iron door. Whatever space exists beyond the sealed barrier is not a dead end. It continues deeper underground. How deep? The FBI will not say. Independent researchers have not been permitted anywhere near it. Miguel Reyes remembers one conversation that still haunts him. During the construction period, someone asked him about blast-resistant doors, industrial grade, the kind installed in hardened government facilities. "I told them I didn't do that kind of work," he said. He set down the wrench he'd been turning. They said they'd find someone who did. The final weeks. The neighbors always knew something was different about the Hackman estate. Maria Sandoval had lived on the adjacent property for 15 years. Around 2017, her dog woke her at 2 in the morning. She stood outside in the New Mexico cold, listening. "There was this sound," she said, "like heavy machinery, but muffled, coming from underground." She paused. It lasted maybe 20 minutes, then stopped. Her voice hardened. "My husband thought I was imagining it. I know what I heard." Other neighbors reported unexplained ground vibrations, trucks arriving before dawn, power fluctuations originating from the Hackman property. One neighbor, unprompted, described seeing Gene Hackman standing outside at 3 in the morning on multiple occasions in his final years, standing perfectly still, staring at a specific location on his property, the same location where investigators later found the tunnel entrance. Former staff members who departed the estate have proved difficult to locate. Local researchers who began investigating the property's history subsequently stopped responding to inquiries. Nobody has explained why. And then there is the surveillance question. The property had thermal cameras, motion sensors, a security grid one professional assessor compared to a government installation. Internal recordings were found corrupted. External cameras, the only footage that survived, show lights moving through different rooms during the 3 weeks between Betsy's death and the discovery of both bodies. Someone was moving through that house. In a mansion with overlapping detection systems that would register a domestic animal crossing a hallway, not one frame of internal footage survived. No explanation has been provided. The timeline haunts the investigation. Betsy died around February 3rd. Gene died sometime after, alone, in a monitored compound that should have made undetected presence impossible. The reorganized documents, the furniture displaced from positions held for years, the documents searched with systematic focus. Did Gene discover something in the tunnel? Was he hiding something before someone arrived? Some investigators believe the tunnel provided access that bypassed every ground-level security element, that someone entered from below, repeatedly, across those 3 weeks. A smaller number believe Hackman descended into that chamber one final time, and that what he found there is what killed him. No one has explained the corrupted cameras. No one has explained how a death went unnoticed for 3 weeks on a monitored estate. What they don't want you to know. The investigation is ongoing. Dr. Vasquez has been direct about what the documentation suggests. The tunnel predates Hackman's ownership by at least 70 years. The question isn't just who built it. The question is what Gene Hackman's relationship was to whatever it contains, and whether he was the last person appointed to protect it. Property transfer records show paperwork to acquire the estate has already been filed. The buyer, an anonymous trust registered in the Cayman Islands. No names, no disclosed principals. A shell entity with sufficient capital to move on one of the most restricted, privately held properties in the American Southwest, moving before federal investigators have finished processing the scene. Federal authorities have placed the property under restricted access. Every Freedom of Information Act request has been denied. Every single one. On grounds of an ongoing investigation. An ongoing investigation into what exactly? 2 elderly deaths officially ruled as natural causes. Since when does that warrant federal classification? The iron door is still sealed. The 47 crates are in federal custody. The German ledger filled with names that were supposed to have been erased from history has not been publicly acknowledged by any agency. And the airflow behind that door, the space that continues past what thermal imaging can measure, nobody is talking about it. Gene Hackman wasn't hiding from fame. Investigative sources suggest he was guarding something buried long before he ever set foot on that property. Some researchers believe he acquired the estate specifically because of what he knew was beneath it, that he spent decades keeping certain people away, and that in his final weeks, alone in that mansion, the cameras dark, his wife already gone, he was still doing it. 312 feet below his library floor, the iron door is still sealed. The airflow on the other side is still moving. Something down there is still waiting. The question is not whether what's behind that door is real. The evidence says it is. The question is what happens when it finally opens, and whether we'll be allowed to know. Subscribe right now, because the moment anything changes about what's behind that door, you'll want to already be here. Drop your theory in the comments. What do you think the FBI found beyond that iron barrier? And why haven't they opened it?